Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this third day of the doctoral seminar of the Charles V Foundation. We are going to devote this gathering to culture, heritage, history, and the memory for the peace, for the promotion of European values, integration, and peace. We're going to start this third day with Laetitia Aulit from the University of Leuven. She's going to tell us about the Moors and Christians festivities during the 21st century in Spain. To introduce her and to direct her work, we have Rosa Maria Martínez de Codex, who's a great friend of the foundation. And she has participated in these seminars, in these doctoral seminars, but she's also the director of one of our courses, our regular summer courses devoted to Charles V. We organize them yearly. So in approximately 1 month, we will organize one of these courses. She is an American history professor at the Complutense University of Madrid, and she is the vice director of the religious freedom in the Spanish Ministry of Justice, and she's the president of the Spanish Association of Freedom of Religion. She's the vice president of the European Association of American Historians, the vice president of the International Association of History of Indian Law. She's the current vice president of the International Religious Liberty Association based in Washington, former member of the Scientific Committee of the Observatory of Religious Pluralism of the Pluralism and Coexistence Foundation. She has been working in the field of freedom of religion for decades. So the work of Laetitia is very much connected to her experience. Rosa, it's a great honor and a pleasure to have you here with us, and the floor is all yours.
Buenos días en este precioso.
Good morning. It's the 9th of June 2023, a beautiful day. I must start saying that when I see this on top of the table, this record of activities of 2022, and you start taking a look at the book, you see the large amount of activities that the Yuste Foundation team has carried out. It's like, how can they do it? Because you have to be part of the foundation or really close to the foundation to realize that it's really hard to work internationally from the national arena. All of those who have moved to the national, to the international sphere, we know how difficult it is and how personally hard it is to be traveling, networking constantly. And the cultural networking project of the cultural routes has been going on for many years. It doesn't come out of the blue moon. And these records tell us and bear witness of how consolidated their work is. Congratulations to Juan Carlos Moreno, to the director, for all this work, this wonderful work that has been that is so accomplished. Juan Carlos has been coordinating wonderfully all the different partners that are part of this network of the cultural routes. And he's so helpful in terms of logistics with all the speakers. And that's something that we have to mention because although you're not here, you feel like you're part of it because Miguel Ángel coordinates everything wonderfully. The Yuste team is wonderful. Thank you so much. All of those who are part of the team, thank you. These publications are great. I'm very grateful for them. And we have, and the foundation has 2 wonderful translators too. I have the pleasure to introduce Laetitia Aulit. I have been working on religious minorities for many years from different perspectives, which always gives you the opportunity to carry out an analysis with different views or different perspectives. I was in the Subdirectorate of Religious Affairs in the Ministry of Justice 20 years ago. And that work allowed me to have a perspective from the government on how to address religious minorities and also majorities. I've worked on freedom of conscience and freedom of thought, so I was defending a fundamental right. My work was devoted to seeing how this topic was addressed in international and national fora. It was the first time that the Ministry of Justice took over the risk of appointing someone in charge of the section of religious freedom. That was a new route in the governmental level. And it was the first time that this was addressed from the perspective of law and not religion. And this has to do with what Laetitia studied, because she delved in a case study. So based on this case study, which is the Moors and Christians festivities in Spain in the 21st century, she has connected the conceptual framework required for a case study. She started working on this case study using a linguistic analysis methodology. She comes from the world of philology, so her analysis is based on this methodology, linguistics. And she started analyzing expressions in connection to these festivities that take place in Spain. We're talking about expressions published in the press. These festivities between the 10th century and the 15th, 16th century were very controversial because the international arena was very complex. During 2010, from 2010 and onwards, these festivities started becoming very controversial because of Islamic terrorism. I must say something about this work. Initially, this heritage was based on culture, heritage, and memory. Culture, heritage, history, and memory. She has tried to connect these four aspects. She wants to point to some options to study in the future. She not only carries out this case study, she also proposes some potential research for the future in line with culture and memory. It's hard to talk about memory. Talking about history is also hard. In this country, when it comes to certain aspects, is very touchy. So I'm going to talk about Laetitia's work. She focuses on the strategies of intensification in written and oral interactions on these controversial topics. So based on this case study, the purpose is to reflect on the values defended around the Moors and Christians festivities, assessing the position of the different stakeholders that take part in these festivities. She also aims at understanding better the role carried out or that may be carried out by the festivities in culture and heritage and in the Spanish and European society. These festivities were considered as potential candidates for the UNESCO heritage. Laetitia considers that thanks to a better understanding of the different positions and the meaning attached to a popular tradition, the festivities, such as the Moors and Christians festivities, can respond to some current challenges in terms of integration and coexistence between cultures. And this is what's interesting. How can you remodel a concept that comes from the historic tradition and you translate it into a 21st century culture that contributes to solidarity between cultures? That's the transition. She is trying to develop this idea through this case study. Laetitia has followed the press, and she has found some controversies in the media on this topic. There have been different narratives about protests against these festivities that give some indication about the challenges in the society that these complaints come from. So what she does is to show us and to present the different meanings of these protests in different parts of Spain, and how this analysis makes it possible to analyze the different aspects, to reconstruct the arguments of the stakeholders in the controversy, and based on that we analyze the different arguments from the points of view of their formulation and the themes. And she aims at trying to analyze the festivities and their role in the current society. So, before giving her the floor, I want to touch upon what heritage means. Throughout the 20th century, there has been a trend to turn culture into heritage. And what does this mean? There has been a transformation, and it's possible to see how the cultural heritage has become universal and its meaning has expanded in the last 25 years. One of the features of this topic is due to the fact that the definition of heritage is very dynamic. There are different meanings, and you will see that in her presentation. One of the most outstanding changes in this new conceptualization of heritage is that one of the most remarkable things is that there's a step from this hidden heritage to something that includes natural and cultural aspects. There's a change here. Heritage was based on rural and localized heritage to something that is intangible, urban, and doesn't correspond to a territory. It's not tangible. Now, heritage includes immaterial and intangible aspects as something collective and universal if those festivities are declared a common heritage. Lastly, the classical heritage production spaces have been overcome by a series of requests for recognition. The new heritage subjects and the presence of new transformations have changed the setting, and the inclusion of new subjects and objects makes us wonder who the real carrier is. I mean, who can request this inclusion as heritage? This makes things complicated. Who can defend or advocate for the inclusion of something as heritage? It's not an easy subject. And there are new ways of consuming heritage, and the growing demand of tourism has shaped how heritage and tourism are conceived. Nowadays, heritage has become something that's a commodity, and we must say that because there are numerous interests, economic interests. Therefore, there's an interest to not only consider or include something as heritage, but also to globalize it. Once heritage becomes global, a way of heritage becoming global is by being included in the list of universal heritage. So this said, I'm going to give Laetitia the floor. She's going to tell us about the celebration of Moors and Christians in the 21st century Spain. I really hope that you enjoy her presentation because it's beautiful. Good morning, everyone. I want to start by thanking Rosa for her presentation that gives some context. It's a perfect context for my research and my contribution. I also want to thank the Yuste Foundation, the directors of this seminar, Miguel Angel, and each of the participants of this seminar, because it's a great honor for me to be able to participate here in this seminar and present my work. I also want to thank the technical team, interpreters, and experts for all their advice they gave my colleagues, because I learned a lot from that advice. I also want to thank and congratulate my colleagues, because the presentations that we have been able to hear yesterday and the day before yesterday, they have set a very high bar. As Rosa very well said, my work addresses Moors and Christians festivities in Spain in the 21st century based on a linguistic study of a controversy that has taken place in the last decades. I would like to start by asking something. Do you think that the Moors and Christians festivities could be part of UNESCO's immaterial heritage? Because the Moors and Christians festivities take place in different parts of Spain and even outside Spain. Some celebrations have been recognized as the Alcoy festivities or Villajoyosa festivities that are considered an international tourist good. And they are trying to achieve this recognition as immaterial heritage from UNESCO. So this is my question. What do you think? And as we will see during this communication, we are going to analyze the discourses of different stakeholders connected to this controversy, these festivities, and the different opinions. So my aim or my objective is for you to write down the aspects that you consider more relevant. I think first we should reflect on what we consider as intangible assets of heritage by UNESCO. According to Article 1, the immaterial heritage are the uses, representations, and expressions, knowledges, and techniques that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as an integral part of their cultural heritage. It is also said that this heritage is transmitted from one generation to the other one and is recreated constantly by the communities and groups based on their environment, connection with nature, and their history, and attaching them a sense of continuity and belonging, and contributing thus to the respect of human diversity and creativity. In this article, we also see how this heritage manifests in different environments, among which the social, ritual uses and the festive activities that are closely connected to the vision of the world, history, and memory of communities. As you know, there are some traditions that have received this recognition from UNESCO. There are many examples. I can't give a detailed list. For example, flamenco has been included in UNESCO's list, and it is said that flamenco is a sign of identity of numerous groups and communities, particularly of the Gypsy ethnical community, and it has had a very major role. We also have castells. It's a tradition with over 200 years of history that is transmitted from generations to generations, and UNESCO has included as it expresses human cooperation. And the last example are the fallas in Valencia. it's considered that they are a source of pride for communities, and the fallas contribute to shape their cultural identity and social cohesion. The purpose of my work is to reflect on cultural heritage connected to the history and memory based on what the Moors and Christians festivities are and what they mean in the Spanish current society. So, as it has been said, the purpose of this work is to reflect on the values connected to the Moors and Christians festivities based on the linguistic, argumentative study of a controversy. So the purpose is not so much to open a line of debate on whether or not the Moors and Christians festivities are historic. I want to focus on the different discourses that arose. So that's why we're following a structure. First, I will introduce the festivities, the Moors and Christians festivities, and their controversial aspects. Then I will talk about the approach I adopted, and then we will carry out the linguistic, argumentative study of the controversies before concluding with a final reflection on the values of these festivities. To start, the Moors and Christians festivities based on the Moors and Christians festivities union. Which is an organization or an entity that has the purpose of defending the festivities, trying to solve the potential issues that may arise. So according to this organization, these festivities take place in 75 towns and 7 provinces, but they differ from one town to the next. For example, in the area of Jaén, Granada, and Andalusia, these festivities include a struggle or a fight over a religious image, a saint, virgin. First, the Moors take over that image, and then the next day, Christians take over that image. They capture the image. And there is an itinerary of the Nasrid legacy that includes these festivities. And then in Villajoyosa, there's a different way of celebrating them. There's a pirate disembarkment, and there's a confrontation with the local population. And then we have the festivities in the region of Valencia. In Alcoy, for example, there is a really spectacular parade with many troops, and there are some religion aspects. And then we have the embassies. The embassies are some events that commemorate the confrontation between the Moors and the Christians. The first day we have the embassy from the Moors to the Christians, and the Moors lose the castle, and then the next day we have the embassy from the Christians to the Moors when the Christians take over the castle. However, in some towns there were other celebrations, like the trial to the traitor Moor or the conversion of Moors to Christianity. Those are the events that gave rise to the controversies around the festivities. So starting in 2006 and in the following years, 2011 and in the subsequent years, there was a controversy in the media. It all started when the Federation of Islamic Religions called for the suppression of these festivities because they claimed that they were offensive acts against Muhammad in some towns of Valencia, among which the destruction of a figure that is called in Spanish La Mahoma. This figure is destroyed with fireworks after the Christians take over the castle. And the political sphere echoed this controversy because the three-sided government of Valencia in 2016 threatened with suppressing or canceling the parties or these festivities. So we are going to analyze the discourses. We're going to analyze the statements by different stakeholders. First, the people who protested. We have talked about the complaints by the Islamic community, but we're also going to analyze the opinions by citizens, because all of these were published in the media, and in the media we could read some comments and some tweets. The purpose is to know what citizens in Spain think about the situation. We also focus on the statements by institutions and entities that are devoted to publicizing the festivities. And we also analyze the positions of people involved in organizing the festivities based on focus groups. We organized focus groups in a specific town, but I will present this later on. These research questions are based on the arguments and the discursive aspects. First, we try to see the positions defended by the people who give their opinion on these controversial aspects. Then, what arguments support these positions, and what elements, what are the highlighted arguments. And the goal is to see what values underlie these positions. We, as for methodology, we base our work in the argumentative theory of Righer-Greco. I will give an example of this in the first case study, and I will talk about the analysis discourse. We will focus on the pragmatic attenuation and intensification based on the Vallesco group in the University of Valencia. I will also introduce the type of analysis. As for the people who who protested, in this fragment, we see that the president of the Spanish Federation of Islamic Religious Federations, which is also the imam in the Malaga Mosque, requested these festivities to be cancelled because of the image given of the Islamic population, as he said that there was no room for this type of festivities in the democratic society. And he said that for having a good coexistence, these religious festivities, need to be cancelled, because in a plural Spain where all religions have room, these festivities need to disappear. If we reconstruct the arguments given by this person, we see, well, let's see, what is his position? His position is that these festivities need to disappear. And what are his arguments? First, there's an argument composed by two parts. The festivities are offensive because there are acts offensive against Muhammad in some Spanish towns in a democratic Spain. The representation of Islamophobia or racism must disappear. There are two parts, but these two parts compose an argument. And the second aspect is that the origin of the festivities doesn't date back from the Reconquest, but from a later stage. This could be considered as the refutation of an argument that may be exposed by the people who defend the festivities. Let's analyze the first argument. This person based his argument in an endoxon, which is an opinion, a shared opinion that refers to social values connected to democracy, because in his views, in a democratic country, he's talking about a democratic country. So these words are a call for all the values connected to democracy, where all denominations are represented. We cannot have Islamophobia. So we have this opinion, And he also says there are acts against Mohammed in some towns of Valencia. The logic is that the thing is present and the effect is also present. What does this mean based on the president of this organization? If there are acts that are offensive against Mohammed in some Valencian towns, the effect, racism and Islamophobia are also present in society. And this is why he claims that the Moors and Christians festivities must disappear. So, therefore, we see that there's a shared belief in a society connected to democratic values, the rejection of Islamophobia and racism, and in terms of discourse elements, we see that there's an strategy, an intensification strategy by the use of deber, of must plus infinitive. According to Mitchell's work, when a speaker who doesn't have the authority to impose an action, when this speaker uses this verb, deber, must, the effect is that this is presented as a need. In this case, the elimination of racism in society is presented as a need, and the suppression of Moors and Christians festivities in the view of the president of this organization is presented as a need. As for citizens and internet users that reacted, we see that there are diverse opinions in favor and against. This is an example, and it's a comment that appeared in a forum as a reaction to the complaints by Afedi. And this comment says, neither Moors or goats can be scorned in the name of history. We are not going to commemorate the Inquisition by burning women. We keep torturing animals in bull rings, and there's an increasing pressure by society to put an end to this. Whether we like it or not, and even if it takes 20 more years, we must review our traditions. So in this comment, the opinion is traditions must be reviewed in Spain because neither Moors nor goats can be scorned in Spain, and we should not commemorate historic events that affect different social groups. This position refers to a shared belief connected to social values like respect. Implicitly, there's the value of respect. It says that nobody should be scorned, and that's a call for respecting everyone. And there's a newspaper article that talks about humiliating acts in the Moors and Christians festivities. The logic here is that if something is good, it can go on, whereas if it's not good, it cannot be celebrated anymore. So if they are acts that are humiliating in the Spanish society through the Moors and Christians festivities, these festivities should not keep taking place. And this is why this person thinks that festivities should be reviewed in Spain. So this opinion refers to respect. It also uses the verb deber, must, and it presents the opinion as a need. And in this case, it also says that nobody should be scorned in the name of history. And there is a list, which is an intensification linguistic strategy, because it makes it possible to present the opinion as something that is very remarkable for readers. It says neither goats nor chickens nor Moors can be scorned. So this list gives a stronger effect. It's stronger than saying nobody should be scorned. It says neither Moors nor chickens nor goats. So it makes an emphasis. In the comments that we are going to read, we will see what aspects are added. In this case, this comment states that Spaniards are also calling for respect. In the first part, the speaker talks about the offensive or non-offensive character of the festivities. There's a nuanced opinion. Of course, it's considering the Muslim Christian festivities is an extreme, but it is also true that all festivities must take place respecting all religions. And this speaker gives her opinion about the need to modify festivities. Let's take a look at the structure of this opinion. The arguments that appear in this comment are mostly or mainly connected to the position on the potential offensive character of the festivities. This person says it would be intolerable that any Islamic countries doll or a mannequin dressed up as a Westerner would be thrown from a tower. And then we have the figure of St. James the Moorslayer. And then this person gives an opinion about whether or not suppressing the festivities. It's interesting to highlight that the only argument that appears here is that it's an opinion. Moors and Christians festivities do not hurt anybody. And that's an opinion, but this person does not justify whether this opinion is correct or not. This idea of respect is related, or it can be connected to the idea of tolerance and reciprocal respect. In this comment number 4, the speaker advocates and defends that there should be further reciprocity and firmness, and there shouldn't be that much vagueness, and it reaffirms part of the position of the previous speaker. This person says it should not be allowed for mannequins to be thrown from towers, but it also says we should be firmer in our positions. Tolerance and respect must be reciprocal between communities and countries. And this is an opinion. It's a nuanced opinion. This person is saying, yes, we must indeed respect the Muslim community, but they must also respect us. In some comments, we can see how this idea of reciprocal respect, at the end of the day, manifests or appears in some cases as an offense. The idea is, well, if they do not respect us, if we have to cancel our festivities, then that would be an offense for us. As the comment number 6 illustrates, forbidding this festivity would be an offense to those celebrating this festivity, this tradition, and it's an offense to the culture of a country if festivities are cancelled. In some cases, like in number 5, we see how this lack of respect in the view of some citizens can also be connected in a certain way to attacks or offenses. Like, for example, when this person says, this imam says, they should start respecting our traditions and feelings. In the answer to the imam, they say, if they do not respect us, they should go back to their country. That's what some person says in response to the imam. There's another comment that says what they have to do is to respect, but also adapt to what we have in Spain, and they should integrate. This is another opinion. To wrap up this reflection on the different arguments appeared in comments and tweets on media, I would like to highlight that there are also references to the historic nature of the festivities. There are also references to the values, the traditions. There's comment number 9. This is history. Whether we like it or not, this is history. So this position is in favor of the festivity. And the argument is that these festivities are history. They are commemorating a historical event in our society. We have comment number 10, which is very, or more expressive. The person says, that would be enough. Enough is enough. Anybody to come here to try to take away our traditions, our values, what's going on? We have these ideas here about the Spanish traditions, the Spanish values. And then we have number 11. I'm not in favor or against many things, but these are very old traditions. And that's it. Here there's an emphasis in the historic nature, but it also makes an emphasis in how old they are. In terms of the institutions and the organizations included in the promotion of the festivities, which are the entities and that are the entities that are supporting and making possible the demands of recognition. For example, when it comes to trying to be included as heritage by UNESCO. Here, they are defending the historic nature. And we have a comment here that talks about, here we have the statement by Francisco López Pérez, who's the president of the Moors and Christians festivities, and he said, in these festivities, we just try to portray the histories of the peoples and the coexistence of these two cultures for many centuries. So in his view, these festivities cannot offend Muslims because what these festivities are doing is to portray history, portray culture, and portray the coexistence of different cultures. He also says that these complaints are due to the lack of knowledge, that people who are complaining are not familiar with this. And he invites this imam to become familiar with the festivities to be able to have an informed opinion. This is the position that underlies this statement by Miguel Ángel Martínez Pozo, the cultural advisor of UNDE, who wrote a doctorate thesis on the Moors and Christians festivities. And he says, these festivities are an encounter and a dialogue between cultures and religions, the memory of different historic episodes that have made it to our days. He insists that in the current festivities, nobody is defeated or nobody wins because there is just one people, the Spanish people, that with its heritage and linguistic and history heritage has this richness from time immemorial. Something that I haven't said yet, but I think is very important, is that this position of the UNDEF president involves a defense of the Moors and Christians festivities. In this case, the shared beliefs or the shared ideas imply that those who know the festivities know that they cannot be offensive. It's interesting here because he doesn't talk about values. He talks about the fact that being knowledge about the festivities is what allows people to defend the festivity. So it's not a matter of values, but a matter of being familiar with how they work. So the people involved in the celebration of these festivities defend these different positions. And these positions have been expressed in different focus groups. Let's talk about these focus groups that we carried out in one of the communities. We carried out focus groups with 6 participants. There were different profiles: men, women, active stakeholders, musicians, people involved in the organization, in selling tickets. So there were different profiles. And the objective was to express their opinions about the Moors and Christians festivities and the controversial aspects. I was there as facilitator, and I had a list of questions. Some questions were about the role of Moors and Christians festivities in their society, in their view. Another question was what aspects of the controversy were more remarkable to them. It's interesting to see how participants, the people involved in organizing these festivities, at the end of the day, share the same comments or refer to the same aspects. For example, here we have an opinion. The speaker emphasized the integrative nature of the festivities. I continue thinking that the festivities are totally integrative. We have always talked for many years about the fact that the easiest way of someone from anywhere in Spain to integrate here in Ontinyent is to join a troop. As easy as that. And I understand the same happens and will happen with the Muslim population. So this person's position is in favor of the festivities because these festivities integrate everyone, and his or her opinion is based on the integration of people from other parts of Spain who integrated in Ontinyent thanks to the festivities because they took an active role in the troops. And this person says that the same thing can apply to the Muslim population. So there's this idea of adaptation, of integration. Here we have another opinion on the historic nature of the festivities. In many cases, participants had a somewhat nuanced position. They recognized that there was a historic background, but nowadays we are not celebrating the battles. We're not recreating the battles as such. These celebrations allow us to be together. It's an event, a community event. In this example, this person says, although our festivities has somewhat of a historic background, there's a major element of fantasy. At the end of the day, nowadays, festivities are a show. In the festivities in Valencia, there is a very spectacular parade with great costumes. It's a show. It's a great show. So this person says, the festivities should not be taken purely historically. These festivities are inspired by history, but the goal is not to tell history as it happened at all. And this "at all" element emphasizes the message. Our festivity, in my view, is 20% history, 80% fantasy. Or I don't know how accurate this is. And in the focus group, the other participants said, yes, of course, yes, that's it. Everyone agreed in that focus group with this idea. And there's an emphasis made on the positive nature of the festivities. And this person says, there should be dialogue, there should be a sensitiveness, a willingness to adapt. They have to adapt to where they're living, but we must also adapt. So this idea is that everyone wants to give up something. So there's this idea of adaptation, of integration, but not only Spaniards must adapt, or not only Muslims must adapt. There has to be a mutual reciprocal integration, and there's this reciprocal respect idea. To wrap up, we're going to talk about this example. Here we have a speaker who reacts openly to the publications in the press. The position here, again, says that, yes, we do understand the positions of the people who protested, but, for example, in the case of the entities that support the festivities, this person thinks that people who are protesting may not be familiar with the festivities. This is the position. And then when it comes to the arguments, this person says, the last thing that happens here is to undervalue Muslims. This is not true. We are not undervaluing Muslims. In many acts, the Muslim culture is celebrated. So in our festivities, people should come to our festivities to see how much the Muslim culture is celebrated. So this person is saying, well, I do understand this position, but at the end of the day, these people are not familiar with the festivities because we do not undervalue Muslims. And this person uses a series of intensification strategies. For example, the superlative suffix in many years, or this person also says at no time, which is also an intensification. And this person says, in many events, they are celebrated. And this person says, what is shown to the public. So they're not only not undervaluing Muslims. His position or her position is that they're also trying to make the Muslim community better known. We have been able to see how there are different positions when it comes to the Moors and Christians festivities. Some positions are connected to respect, the values of democracy, tolerance, peace, integration, dialogue. It's another aspect. And something that is very interesting in my view is that all these stakeholders that are represented in these opinions make reference to the same values and the same arguments from different viewpoints, of course. But I think that at the end of the day, this idea of dialogue is a common aspect because dialogue serves to understand what offends others and what we may be doing through our culture. So that's why I think that the Moors and Christians festivities, if there is dialogue connected to these festivities, if there's a promotion of the values and there's a better understanding of what the mission of these festivities is, I think that if all this happened, they could have a very important message in Spain and in the world. These type of festivities also take part in other parts of the world. So this is a good example of how we can take into consideration heritage, memory, to do something good for the current society. Because as we have mentioned, there are controversial aspects, there may be problems when it comes to understanding terrorism, etc. But I think culture and heritage can serve and can have a good effect to understand and overcome the situation. Okay, well, thank you very much. I hope you liked my presentation. And here we have some references. These are just the ones that were expressly cited in my presentation. Thank you very much.
Está abierto. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Laetitia. And you stuck to your time, so thank you for your very easy to follow presentation, very well organized. So congrats. And thank you for all the images you've shown that show all the linguistic analysis you've made. Difficult to understand if you don't show pictures. Thank you also for the final results, so congratulations, because I know you work from Leuven, but you're using bibliography that you found in Spain. So all of you who work in European and American institutions, you need to understand that in Spanish bibliography we have lots of sources for nationalism and all those kinds of things. So you should include it in your databases and in your corpora. And now I'm giving the floor to the participants of this seminar because I want them, well, I would like them to to express their opinions regarding the analysis she just made. Paula, microphone number 4. Hello, Laetitia. Good morning and congratulations. Because it's really difficult. This kind of studies are really difficult, and I know this is out of the scope of your fields of study for some of you, but it is somewhat close to what I study. I work in the fields of attenuation and intensification, so I understand the complexities of your study. For everyone to know, Laetitia has analyzed all words and much more than words. Yesterday we talked about participation. Enrique was talking about participation to talk about things that are beyond words. And for that, Laetitia had to recontextualize everything to understand, in order to understand who said what, in what context. And it is very interesting to see the whole discourse of rejection or support with the use of different strategies. All the words and expressions used to either defend or advocate for this type of festivals or to plainly reject it. So that was the trickiest part. And I think you have mentioned the Grupo Valesco from Valencia, one of the many groups, or one of the few groups that have organized these kind of things. And I also want to highlight the fact that Spanish is not your mother tongue. So having to try and dive into these expressions and what we say or what we do when we speak, because as you know, we call it the theory of acts of speech, because we act and speak at the same time, is much more difficult for you. And for example, using the first person plural, we have to do something is different from I have to do something, or I need to do something, or we need to do something. Using plural or singular forms is a decision. So thank you, because I was looking forward to listening to you. A magnificent work, and I hope we can collaborate together. Well, that's all I want to say, because I also want to leave the microphone available for my colleagues. I focus more on intensification rather than attenuation, but excellent work. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Professor Baigorri.
Thank you, Laetitia, for your and for the interesting topic that you have chosen. I think there are a few things I wish to mention. I mean, I see this element of the commemorative part of the supposedly real history in the contact between Muslims and Christians in that part of the country. This is part of the new regimes of historicity, as François Hartog has pointed out, and it has obviously a number of tentacles, particularly, I think, basically profit through tourism and the development of activities which obviously allow to make money to some groups. It's not just a tradition. And celebrating traditions that were supposed to be based on the apparently peaceful coexistence of the three religions in Spain, etc. In this case, it is focused only on the Muslim side. I wonder what is the influence of the Holocaust and the experience of the Holocaust, which is very much alive in the minds of everybody these days, to avoid celebrating, for instance, the burning of the Jewish quarters in the Middle Ages. What would be the reaction from Israel or from Jewish communities, in case that was, even simply performed as a, as a ceremony. I wonder whether that has an influence. I wonder whether the fact that most of the Muslims who live in that part of the country, the community of Valencia, has an influence on this as well. They're sociologically usually low-class workers, and I wonder how much terrorism has, Muslim terrorism has had an influence in some of these opinions as well. I wonder whether those who defend traditions, this is a tradition, we used to kill the Moors. Well, I wonder how we would react, for instance, to a tradition like, or how we react actually to the tradition of wearing the hijab, or to female genital mutilation, for instance. That's a tradition. I mean, we do this in our traditions and so on and so forth. How would we react to that in that sense? So I know you have taken the points of view of several participants from both sides, and that you are quite neutral in this sense. But I think this is simply what comes to my mind when seeing these things, because coexistence, most of the time, through the number of centuries that that coexistence was prevailing in our peninsula, basically, was a situation of conflict. There was a border zone all the time, but it was a very profitable one too. I mean, simply the ransom paid for the rescue of captives was actually a modus vivendi for a number of groups. By the way, that has an interesting point for the linguistic side, because the alfaqueques, which is the name of my group of research, were those who were going to rescue captives. Cervantes was a captive in Algiers, and he was rescued with money paid for him in order to free him, just to mention one well-known case. So this is a sobering lesson, and I think that is a great merit of your research, a sobering lesson of how playing with history or with historical, sometimes anachronistic facts may be risky, in a sense. In other context, I wonder whether you have checked the kind of discourse analysis made by Teun van Dijk, because he talks about also some of the elements of discourse. He analyzes the press as well. You were talking of mitigation of certain things, and etc. I wonder whether you have checked that, but it might be a good author to check if you want. Thank you.
A Latil, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias. No lo he tomado tan...
Thank you. I didn't have him into account in this part of the presentation, but I will use it for the final paper. And regarding cohabitation, coexistence, and our possible reaction, so of course it's a tricky thing, but the offensive acts in the Moors and Christians festivals are not celebrated anymore, which is a sign that shows that festivals evolve and have everything into account and take consideration of the different communities that live in Spain. So I think through dialogue and common understanding and mutual respect, they can play a role. But of course, offensive acts or the Mahoma, the Mohammed burning and things like that would be risky. Even for some local people, that was too offensive. But currently, since those most offensive acts are not celebrated anymore, I think it shows that these festivals evolve in a positive way. bearing in mind, they have in mind our society. Professor Bussière?
I ask myself if you can rely your explanation with historical context of the 20th century. Because where there's fiestas equally popular every time, or were there period where they were quite down and period where strong revivals? And can you link the revival with political context? For instance, in France, in the 20s, Joan of Arc was celebrated by Republican government and Catholics. It was a way to reconcile them after First War. If now you go in Paris to the fiestas around Joan of Arc, what kind of people you will meet? National Front. So the same event can have a very different meaning according to the political general context, and not only on other, you know. So what about this?
Atril, por favor.
Por este comentario. Es verdad que, bueno, yo no soy historiadora.
Well, I'm not a historian, so my approach was basically a linguistic one. But the celebration of festivals or festivities or fiestas through history is interesting because the first representations date from the 12th century, and some celebrations are still there, some others have disappeared, and that is very complex in the society. It's interesting to see or to understand why some festivals have been abandoned in some municipalities or other places. Maybe because it is controversial, because of the depiction of the Muslim population, because there are too many Muslims in a specific place. That is interesting. Unfortunately, that is out of the scope of my study and my skills. But I will have to take it into consideration. I will try and include a broader historic perspective of those fiestas or festivals to try and get a better contextualization of the opinions. Thank you, Laetitia. Anna Milosevic.
Presentation. I just have a couple of reflections on the structure of the paper. Okay. And as Rosa rightfully said this morning, it is a case study. So yes. You're dealing with one case study. Let's start with that. You begin by actually asking whether UNESCO intangible heritage has something to do, can have some kind of potential for this kind of fiestas, in concretely this one of the Moros y Cristianos in Spain. But then when you're trying to bring attention to the relevance of this intangible heritage and fiestas, you narrow it down immediately to this particular case without actually discussing much broader relevance that these intangible heritage can have, bringing maybe other examples with other controversies all around Europe. So from what I understood, you come from Belgium, so you're very familiar with the Aalst Carnival and the controversies in the Aalst Carnival. I also wrote about it in newspapers in Belgium when there was this controversy. It's one of the biggest carnivals in Europe, and it's also part of the UNESCO intangible heritage. And they were openly mocking to the Jewish population, using also Nazi propaganda imageries, etc., a couple of years ago. So that was a very huge controversy with very, very important consequences. So I'm wondering why you haven't touched that upon, because that is the major case, because it sparked controversy on the European level. European Jewish Council, the National Parliament of Belgium also opened an investigation, an independent report on whether this kind of offense towards other ethnic and religious communities is actually an offense, or is it freedom of speech? So I think that that kind of case would you would really benefit of situating the relevance of your own specific case more broadly before investigating it into detail. When it comes to the very own structure of your paper, I believe that when you're talking about the method, you're actually talking about theoretical framework, and that in use of data, it wasn't really clear what you did with the data, how you collected data, what kind of data did you use. I saw that you use commentary online, but you said just vaguely from Twitter, from I don't know what kind of websites. So how did you gather that data? You should really detail this into the paper, because it's important. Because the analysis is brilliant, yeah, but you really need to make it very clear what kind of data you collected and where from. And of course, I see the added value of using the linguistic approach to understand the attitudes of all actors involved, but you have to emphasize that in the paper. Okay. And you have to connect it as well in the conclusion, because in the conclusion that you presented, it's actually not a conclusion, it's just a wishful thinking without actually bringing the results of your analysis and connecting the dots together of all four parts. So this needs to be really strengthened and emphasized in the paper. So this is it for me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Ana. Profesora Freixes.
Thank you, Ana. Professor Freixes, microphone number 1. Thank you very much and congratulations, because I liked your presentation very much. The structure was very good and the internal rationale was very good. This is not one of my specialties, but you reminded me of many things, because before 1986, well, I left my hometown, Lleida, in 1986, and when I came back this year, I found out, to my surprise, that there was a Moors and Christians festival, and it was started 20 years ago soon. So what you're explaining, what you said about integration, the covenant, respect, and everything, has been mirrored in the festival in Lerida, because every year there's a battle that is commemorated through a battle. In the 17th and the 18th centuries, it was with Jews, Moors, and Christians, but now there is celebration called the Suda, where the castle is sieged, and some of them are there, they are in the castle, and then others besiege it. And when they take turns, either it's the Moors that are in the castle and the Christians besiege it, or vice versa. So that is a good example for integration. I am not aware of, but I'll ask, because Lerida is one of the provinces in Spain where when there is the highest percentage of integration of foreigners, because the percentage of foreign population is 30%, stable foreign population, which is very high. And then we have interim workers. But I wonder, and I will ask, how much of that population that has a Muslim origin do really participate in the fiestas, in the festivals, because I cannot recognize them under the costumes. I cannot tell whether they are Spaniards or not. So I will find it very useful, because that will help us not delve into the hate speech or hatred speech. It tries to neutralize the hate speech through the use of this representation of a language of dialogue and participation in common things. And that's good, because if we take up other types of attitudes, those are not offenses anymore. Those would be criminal offenses, maybe. So that was very interesting, and I think it can help us understand how or why this type of festivals are celebrated, and how and why we decided to celebrate them after so many years. For example, in Lleida, I was born in Lleida in 1950, so I lived there for 36 years until 1936, and it wasn't celebrated at all. And now it's a yearly celebration. It's an annual festival. So I don't know if it was a tradition, because I don't know, well, how can you tell if something is a tradition? For how long does it have to be celebrated for it to be considered a tradition? Maybe it was an old tradition that was abandoned and then taken back. I knew that in the community of Valencia, these festivals were celebrated for many years, and so I was aware of them, but not in my hometown. Thank you for your work, Professor Fernandez Daza. I want to congratulate you because from a linguistic point of view and the theory, and from the point of view of the theory of the acts of speech, it is impeccable. I just want to make a suggestion. In the line of the rest of the experts' comments, instead of using historic sources, because I know that the work of documenting it is very tedious and hard, I would suggest to use something that is essential. I mean, reading Agustín de Rojas' Loa de la Comedia, that says that Berrio is the creator of this genre. And you're a philologist, just as I am, and Lope de Vega is the author of what we call everything Moorish. And you know that he wrote many pieces of theater. The character of the Moor is a central figure in his works. And then in the carros de comedia, and these festivities of Moors and Christians started to be celebrated. But the characters and the authors were very important. And Agustín de Rojas quoted Berrio as the facilitator of the genre in the 16th century. And he analyzed the costumes that were very conspicuous and very fancy. And in the floats, or the carros de comedia, those or certain scenes were specially celebrated or especially represented, and then people started to represent the same scenes in a more popular way with around materials and with around resources. But I think it dates back well beyond or well before the Middle Ages. And after the Middle Ages, and during the Enlightenment, they were mostly abandoned, and then in the 19th century there was a revival because people had a renewed interest in everything legendary and exotic. Eladio, same microphone. I want to congratulate you too, because I liked it very much, and I think there are very controversial topics, because those who criticize the festivals won't let their women stop using veil. So they ask for respect for themselves, but in their countries of origin, any Christian celebration or any Christian festival would be completely banned. So I would like to ask you to ascertain whether those traditions are real traditions or if they had been made up afterwards. Because it happened to me also in my hometown. I went back to my hometown in Teruel, and there was a new festival, the wedding of the Teruel lovers. There's a book called The Invention of Tradition that demonstrates that some celebrations are indeed very recent, created by romantic writers and authors. A first author to write novel, Emilia Bazán had to use a male name, Ferran Caballero, and she wrote about Val-de-Fava in France, about French traditions. So this is only to contextualize what I'm saying, that some so-called traditions have been in reality made up in recent times, some of them by the Romantics. For example, when I tell my sons that Halloween did not exist in France when we first got there, that it was only an invention of the shops to sell stuff and paraphernalia. Well, thank you, Professor Fernandez Galeano. We still have some minutes left, and I want to congratulate you on your exposition. I have learned from it a lot, and it's important for me to, since I come from Spain, and coming from you, it's really brilliant. And the sources you have used, you have taken opinions from the press and some social media, and I don't know whether you have considered using other types of sources from other countries to see maybe the opinions other Europeans can have, or maybe the opinions of the victims, those influenced, those affected by those festivities. Because well, I think you will find some international opinions, because if there were a candidate to the UNESCO's cultural heritage candidacy list, they should have gotten some reactions in the international arena. Maybe we have some more opinions. You are the last one. You have the mic. So, Laetitia, series of recommendations have been already given to you from your philological approach. It is difficult for you, I know. So that's why I insisted on it being a study case or a case study, because in that way you can compare different things, and that is what Anna Milosevic said. You can have specific sets of bibliography for each case study, but in that case that should be a group research, and that should be food for a European project. And I think it would matter, because working on reconstruction of history and memoir in Europe, in line with Ladio's words, traditions and memoirs and memories that have been made up we're talking about different things here. They're not synonym. Memories or memoir and history are different things. Memories or memoirs have a social and political context and significance, and history is a completely different thing. They don't have the same scientific basis behind them. So having said that, I'm okay, because when we reconstruct this festival, this is what Jesus was saying, there is tension, there is friction, there is also restriction or tensions in the understanding of the Shoah. But this tension have to do not only with the construction of the different identity versions. No, because the background is that we're trying to define or redefine an identity with that historic process. And that implies a particular historical representation. Who am I as opposed to the other? Because an identity is always constructed opposed to something else, in opposition with something else. You need more to define what a Christian is. So communities have developed a differentiated narration in Villajoyosa or Alcoy or somewhere else. So communities do have a say in the reinterpretation of a tradition they have inherited. If you go to the archives, you can ascertain whether it was made up 20 years ago or before. So you can give some scientific basis to that contextualization. When Teresa said, I went back to Lérida and I found out that there is a new celebration, Moors and Christians, and they have negotiated how to fix the celebration so as to avoid all the superiority nuances. So that reconstruction of the superiority goes through integration, through the values she has pointed out. We have to use festivities or festivals or celebrations with integration purposes, not for segregation purposes. But this is hard work. We've been discussing these aspects of memoirs and history for 25 years. Look at the political debates, the disputes about the reconstruction of a present and the past, and the legitimate carriers of the national heritage. In Spain, for example, the Salamanca archive and the transfer of the archive of Salamanca, the Catalonia papers, was a really tricky question, and it was very hard for us to understand and to accept that this conflict is linked to the territorial model that is still to be defined, to say it succinctly. If we fragment the national identity in many multiple ways of understanding, we're losing our identity traits. This is something that you will have to face in your research. You have to react against your tradition because you have to make room for other forms of identity. Of course, we are a plural identity, and we have plural identities, all of us. But it is also true that integration doesn't involve losing what you understand by national identity. So beware of those terms and beware of your speakers, because sometimes they don't react in a proper way to a serious research. Thank you, and Laetitia, you have the floor again.
I just wanted to thank you all for your comments. Thanks for your advice. I will try to take into consideration all these inputs, and I will try to include that in my research in general and in my final article. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues tenemos...
Now we have 25 minutes to get our suitcases and have a cup of coffee. Okay, so we're gonna reconvene here at 11.